Welcome to the 40th episode of the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Garrett Pierce, who is a former student of mine, one of my favorites, though you're not supposed to say that sort of thing. He's also a recent graduate of Arizona State University online. That is actually a second degree. And so what we're going to talk about today is both his experience as a student, his experience as a young professional, and how he feels about school and how he might suggest changing it, both as someone who has recently exited online program, which is something everyone in education is thinking about right now, but also as someone who I personally taught. So for those of you listening who always want to hear, how bad a teacher is this guy, well, here we have someone who can give you the dirt. So Garrett, first, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, even though here is my own home. Now.
That's doing these by Zoom is in a way convenient, but also a little less personal. So so since I sort of did the quick intro to your education, and just to get the backdrop of what your experience is or has been, and that way we can sort of compare the advice that you give or the recommendations you have for improving school to your own experience. How would you describe your education? And start at whatever point you want. It can be kindergarten, it can be undergrad, whatever. What kind of student were you? How was school for you? And what did you study?
Yeah, I mean, I guess going all the way back to grade school, I don't really know if I liked school that much growing up, to be honest. Like, there were certain classes I really liked. For example, your class, I liked just because the way that you taught, challenged me quite a bit and made me, I've always kind of been better when things are open-ended, I guess, when there's maybe not a defined path, so I've always found things like English to be interesting, especially being able to read and analyze and write a paper and that kind of thing. Yeah, I feel like I was a good student. I always had good grades, but I never actually enjoyed school because it just always felt really rigid and restrictive to me. And I think I just have a non-traditional or learning style that is not conducive to the traditional schooling model. I'm a very hands-on, learn by doing. I need to get my hands on it and mess it up a time or two and then understand oh, okay, this is actually how it works and that kind of thing. And I feel like we don't really get that very much in school.
Yeah, and I mean, that probably depends a lot on the school to a certain extent. But for most people going to a quote-unquote traditional or semi-normal public high school, you don't necessarily get a lot of that unless you get into a specialized program. And I mean, my memory of you, what year did you graduate high school?
2011. I think I had you for junior year English, so I think that would have been 09 to 10.
Right. So good. That's around where I had thought. I just didn't have the exact year. And so my memory of you is being a very sort of outgoing and engaging young man. You were good in class discussions, you're a good student. And so when you describe yourself as a good student, I totally get that. The part where you say you didn't feel as good about school, you didn't really enjoy it as much, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but that's also not exactly what I saw, or obviously it's, 10 years later, it's not what I remember entirely. And so when you think about transitioning out of high school and into college, did that experience change at all? You went to Virginia Tech for your first degree, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Right out of high school.
And so was that better, worse, or the same? How did you feel about your undergraduate degree and studies compared to high school?
Yeah, I mean, my path through undergrad was pretty weird because I intended to go into engineering and I did not get accepted to the College of Engineering. So I kind of had to work my way in, to the extent that I had to drive to the community college a couple times a week to take a class, one of the prerequisite classes for the later stuff. And so it was kind of a weird path through their engineering program. And then when I actually got into it, I didn't end up really liking it that much, which was kind of funny. I really wanted to be an electrical engineer because I really wanted to build musical electronics, guitar amps and pedals and that kind of thing. Something I always found interesting and messed around with a little bit in high school. So that was really exciting to me. And then when I got to the electrical engineering program, they were basically just so here's how you build computers. And I was I don't want to build computers. So I really only needed the early circuitry classes, which I had a hard time in as well because it was just it didn't feel open-ended, I guess, and that's the kind of thing. I mean, I understand that, but it was, I guess I'll jump ahead a slight bit to my experience in software engineering, wherein there is a defined end result, a client will want this problem solved, but the way that you get there, you have a toolbox and you just got to figure out like what tools you're going to use to get there. And it's up to you and your problem solving and creativity. And maybe that would have happened if I had stuck with the electrical engineering program, but I didn't find it that way in like the early classes. And so I kind of just really struggled with it. And then I remember a teacher had like a parent that passed away, and his family was from like Taiwan. So he had to like just leave in the middle of the semester. And so we had like a substitute who was just kind of like, yeah, I guess this is what we do. So it was a mess anyway. And so I kind of floated for a little bit after that. That's the first 2 years of undergrad. And then took some random summer classes to like just kind of feel stuff out and see what I might like, and then tried to work my way into industrial engineering. And they had a pretty brutal, I say brutal, it felt brutal to me. It wasn't unreasonable on their end, a like GPA requirement to transfer into the major. And so I worked for an entire year to bring my GPA up, but it was kind of already like too far gone. And so I never really got there. And that, all the pressure I put on myself, I had a year's worth of like 18 credit semesters, which was a lot for me.
Yeah, a lot
so
for
like,
anybody.
yeah, it was really difficult. And so that kind of ended up leading to a pretty rough bout of depression, wherein I spent a week in a facility after like getting kind of suicidal, if we're being totally honest. So then I kind of worked my way out of that, and kind of started seeing or looking at my options. And I had been taking religion classes as a way to improve my GPA and to pick it up as a minor as well, since I was just kind of, spending a lot of time in those classes. And then I realized that the minor and major are really not that different in terms of like their requirements. And I would only have to take like an extra semester versus like, so that would, one extra semester. So 4.5 years versus like, if I were to actually successfully get into the engineering program I wanted to, it would probably be about 6 years before I was done. And at the point that I realized this, we are 3.5 years into my college experience. And all I really wanted to do was just get out, because I just felt like I needed to move on with my life and get out of college into the job market, I guess, and then figure it out from there.
So the religion, in sort of an odd and maybe literary way, like the religion major was your savior, so to speak. It delivered you from the trials of undergrad. It got me
out of a situation I wasn't enjoying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and just real quick, because this connects to something that I'm sort of doing right now. There was a movie that came out in I think 2010 called Race to Nowhere, mm-hmm. which was a documentary made by a woman named Vicky Abeles, I believe is how you say it, and she basically looked at her own children, and she looked at their experience and some friends, and she saw the intense toll, like the mental health toll and the happiness toll, that sort of the GPA games and the SATs and how many APs can you take, et cetera. So she made this film. It looks at how much pressure a lot of young people are under. For her focus is really like middle and high school. And then looks at, what we do in school and how it contributes to that and why we do it. And I bring that up, even though it's 10 years old, because just this week I got invited / suckered into being on a panel to talk about this movie. And I'm the guy who's supposed to be representing public schools and everyone else is like unschooling or, wants to reform it. But a big part of that discussion and the panel discussion is actually tomorrow night. So we're actually going to be talking about some of those mental health issues and about the happiness of students and how school either supports well-being or maybe in some cases doesn't. For you, when things got tough and you started to deal with your own depression, how much of that, and this might be an unfair question, but how much of that would you say is sort of your own, like the pressure was your own? You felt like I needed to do this thing, I'm going to do it, versus how much was professors or your advisor on campus or your parents? Like how much of it was an internal conflict versus how much was external? How much was lumped onto you versus your own sort of your goals and then how you felt about trying to achieve them?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost all internal. Like I wasn't really ever close with that many professors, to be honest, because I was just kind of a drifter. By the end of it, I was closer to a lot more religion professors than I was to any of my engineering professors, just because I never really had any of them repeatedly, and I didn't really end up enjoying their classes all that much because, again, I have a strange learning style, learning style I think is strange, so I just had a really hard time. Like, I can't do lectures, which this is kind of a divergence from the question, but I can't do lectures at all. Like I just get nothing out of just sitting there and listening. But anyway, yeah, I think the pressure was all internal, and I'm very much like an in my own head kind of person. And as I've grown up and, seen therapists, I've gotten a lot better about that. But that was at the beginning of my time seeing a therapist. I started that same semester, which was fall of 2014, fall semester of my senior year, fourth year at school. So I started seeing a therapist, and I was not that great at like managing stuff yet. And yeah, after a long time of just 18 credit semesters and all that, it just got to me,
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it's hard to generalize that kind of experience. And so that's one of the things I'm interested in, and maybe a little cautious or concerned about going into that other discussion, about the movie and, so many students' experiences, because I think this happens in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like that we feel like we need to be in a certain place. And even if no one else tells us, you like in your head, you have this goal, you have this sort of path.
That's absolutely what it was.
When things start not working out, like no one has to tell you do more, do less, do anything else. It's like it's already in there, you're already doing it and sort of telling yourself.
Yeah.
And it's even harder when maybe you're in classes you're not feeling great about, or where you don't have that personal connection. Like when you said, I felt more of a relationship or more connection to some of the religion professors. Yeah, it probably makes sense though, because the nature of the class is
they were like 8-person classes. Yeah.
They're small. There's going to be a lot of discussion, and you're also talking about things that are personal.
Yeah.
Even in a religious history class, you can't talk about it without connecting some of it back to personal things. Definitely. Whereas if you're studying electrical engineering, like at no point do I ever really need to reference personal experience to be engaged in this class. For, say the lecture versus the hands-on piece, I'm thinking, going backwards into high school, did you ever consider maybe taking the VoTech programs where you could have studied not full-on electrical engineering, but you could have done the electrical work, which, as you said, I really just needed some of the early circuitry, and
yeah,
you could have actually done some of that. Is that something that you had considered when you were younger or have thought about since?
No, it was not something I ever really thought about. I was always conscious of like Monroe and Loudoun County specifically, but I never really gave it much thought. I just kind of always, both my parents went to college, and I just was always on the path to college. And now that I think about it, like I wonder a lot, especially in the last couple of years, like what my life would have been like if I had just gone to trade school instead, or, like taken more VoTech classes. Like I remember I took tech ed for 2 years in middle school and just loved it, and then I never took it in high school, and I have no reason why. I just didn't. I guess because I was, bogging myself down with APs to try to get into a good college, because I'd known that I wanted to go to Virginia Tech for a long time. This is where my dad went, and I'd visited a bunch as a kid and just always really liked the atmosphere there. And I still like the town itself, but like a lot of those lecture halls now have a lot of bad memories, I guess.
Right. So, yeah. So I just think, and you said that you had listened to the conversation.
Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. You said that you had listened to the conversation with Tim Gregory, and he's a wonderful shop teacher. And, and I love that he sticks with shop. It's supposed to be technology education, the rest, and he's Tim, the shop teacher,
Yeah.
But in listening to that, it really gets you thinking about the kind of value that classes like that provide. But also, and he's very aware of it and very honest about it, that in a lot of ways it gets treated like a second class in a way, that it's more important for you to take the extra AP class, even in a subject area you don't maybe care about, than say, take that shop class that gives you the hands-on experience that lets you do some of the things you want to do. And I think that as a teacher, and maybe think even from the perspective of a counselor, I think that's something that we don't do very well, or that we're just flat out doing wrong.
Definitely.
We steer, you say, hey, I want to go to Virginia Tech. There's no reason that you can't be taking a shop class or two. There's no reason you couldn't have done electrical work through the VoTech program and still gone on to electrical engineering. But somehow, because that doesn't look like the traditional path to college, I think somehow we discourage it, even if it's not an active, intentional thing. It's like we passively discourage it by promoting like this competition with other students, take the APs, take these things. And as you said, that maybe isn't for everyone, and
right. I don't think it was for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm being honest. Yeah. I think I'm one of those people. And I never felt like I can never remember any time where I like felt discouraged from doing that kind of thing. It's just, I never really thought about it. I never really saw it as an option. And it's funny to me now, because my dad actually works with some kids at Monroe. He's an architect. And so he has worked with some kids from Monroe the past couple of years and designed houses, and the kids build them and they get all this practical experience. I mean, they do everything: plumbing, electrical, masonry, the whole 9 yards. And like, so my dad's very supportive of that kind of thing. And I just guess I didn't really think about it back, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and we might also be shifting a little bit in that mindset. I think we ran through all the SOL standardized testing, the No Child Left Behind, and it's still there, but it's starting to decrease, and I think everyone was so wrapped up in what do the tests say and get the credits, get the AP
Absolutely.
stuff. And I think we're shifting away a little bit, and I hope that's true. But I mean, I actually, I have a pipe dream of opening a school someday, and that's actually how I'd want to do it. Start it as basically a tech ed hands-on school, and let the kids build out the building. And as parts of the building are done, add in the other subject areas, because now it's the students building. This was built by your peers and your predecessors. And because there's so much you can learn by doing that, and there's no reason that we can't offer that opportunity more. And also, full disclosure, it would be a totally cheap way to get the construction done.
That's true. Yeah.
I'd have to be careful about labor laws, but it's an easier way to fund the starting of a school.
Definitely,
what are you doing in school today? Well, I'm building the school. That helps the guy in charge. So, I mean, if you think about sort of the hands-on stuff that you're interested in, that you did or wanted to do, and then you ended up in religion because of personal interest, and then you had the credits and you were going to use that to get out. You already said that the primary motivation to declare the religion major was to get out of school.
It is possible. Yeah.
At that point, though, were you thinking that you were going to use it? Like, were you interested in youth ministry? Did you want to be a professor, or it was really just, let's get this done and I'll sort it out later?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought about a career in it, I guess, after I got out, like when I was just kind of exploring other career options, and I was like, well, I have this degree, what can I do with it? And I don't really know if I'm fit for pastoral ministry, and my religious beliefs have changed quite a bit over the past 5-6 years anyway. But yeah, I mean, there was a time where I was like, maybe I will end up using this degree, and I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do in life. And so I was just kind of looking at what I already had, and that ended up not being the choice I went down. That's probably about the same time. Actually, not probably. In fact, is about the same time I started looking towards the second degree program that I ended up going through.
So how long between graduating from Virginia Tech, how much time passed before you started the online program with Arizona State? Is that a year or two? Is that a few years?
Just under 2. Yeah, I graduated tech in December of 2015. And then started at ASU, well, not at ASU, but with ASU, I guess, in October of 2017.
Okay, what did you do in between?
Coming right out of Virginia Tech, I kind of bumbled around a little bit. I really wanted to work in the craft beer industry, which I guess I kind of left that out. But towards the end of my time at Virginia Tech, I took a couple classes in beer making because at the time they were kind of piloting a program within their food science college about making beer, because it's a burgeoning industry. Well, I guess not right now due to the pandemic, but it was in 2015 for sure, and for many years after. So yeah, I kind of took I was the first through their actual beer making lab class, wherein we homebrewed and drank beer on the school's dollar, which was pretty darn cool.
Excellent.
So yeah, it was awesome. There was 2 lectures a week, and then there's a lab component on Fridays where we would either make beer or drink the beer that we made on school property. I mean, it was, I don't know.
You're almost, you somehow backed into being a modern day monk. You think about the monks who would brew the communion wine, or, they ferment the wine. And what do you do? I religion, copy some manuscripts, and I make and drink a lot of wine. That's that was one of the sweetest gigs you could get in the Middle Ages.
Absolutely.
Here you are, the modern man.
It's prime time.
So, and when you think about getting into that as a profession, that's actually something I've talked to someone, I won't name the brewery because they haven't agreed to do this formally, but I've talked to someone who is not the, I don't know what the word is, head brewer, the brewmaster, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's the guy he's like the head, he's like the executive manager or whatever of one of the bigger local breweries. And he does some of the brewing, but that's not his main, like he runs the business and all the rest. And I just thought, man, what an interesting thing, because they host music, they have food, he has a serious business to run, and there's the beer. And I just want to talk to him about, like, how did you learn to do all those things? Because that's a wild job. The guy does a little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah.
For you, looking at getting into that as an industry, obviously, if you take the classes in college, that would help. Is that something that you think is a reasonable path forward? Like if someone's going to college today and they say, I'm interested in food science, I'm just interested in beer, I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would recommend for or against, or is it just like do it if you love it and be careful?
I mean, everybody in the industry would certainly say do it if you love it. If you were to come out of a school like Virginia Tech and their food science program with a degree focused in beer production, you could probably swing a job working for like Budweiser or something like that, like one of the big brewer, or like one of the macro breweries, or like one of the bigger independent breweries like Sam Adams or something like that. But I mean, if your goal is to work for a small brewery, like it's going to be hard to even pay off your degree, let alone your bills. There's just not a lot of money in the small brewing business. There's more if you own the place, I guess. But yeah, I just ended up not really ever making that much money and being like, this is not really a viable career path. I think it's dependent on exactly what you want to do in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, and you're right. Especially, I think some of it's regional, but there's the boom in microbrewing across the country. But in Virginia, and especially, where we're at in Northern Virginia, there's been this boom both in wine and in beer. And so there's wineries and breweries and all these things popping up everywhere. And you're right. I mean, the pandemic's putting a little damper on that, but the way people might think about that as a job or career opportunity is very different today than it was 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Not saying it's a thing that people should or shouldn't do, but it's at least an option now. Whereas I think that was such a small population, small, sort of career field at the time. Mm-hmm. So you do that for a while. And then how did you decide? Because it's software engineering is the second degree. Is that right? So how do you go from almost electrical engineering to religion to brewing to software? Like how did software become the thing to do? Like, had you taken a class before? What was the path there?
Yeah. So I kind of had, I hit a point in my brewing career where I'd actually like achieved the goal of like getting my hands dirty and working in the brewery. And then I did that for about 6 months, and I was like, this isn't really what I want to do. And then I ended up getting let go from that job anyway. And so I was like, well, I guess I have to figure something else out because I don't want to keep doing this. And now I don't have a job doing it anymore. And so I kind of like took stock of like everything that I had done and been good at. And actually I took Mrs. Gold's class, which I think it was called computer math at the time. And that's like basically intro to Java programming. And I took that senior year of high school and really enjoyed it. And then just never really thought about it, I guess, when I was in college, even though it would have been fantastic to go through Virginia Tech's CS program. And then I, researched the job market and all that kind of stuff. And is like, well, I mean, software's not going anywhere. That's for sure. If anywhere, it's going up. And I was like, all right, well, that's my goal. I'm going to, apply to some programs. And I applied to like some boot camps and certificate programs as well. But ended up deciding that like a traditional degree was the route I wanted to go.
So for that, real quick, how did you make that? That was going to be my next question, is what made you decide to get the degree? Because I hear so many people say that in a lot of tech fields, but particularly in programming and coding, in some of the software engineering, that your certifications are more important. One, because it specifically applies to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Two, because it changes all the time. And so you can update or upgrade or get a new certification in what you need far easier than you could get a new degree. And I'm not saying that I would encourage many people. I mean, I think there's some people who are particularly good at this, where out of high school, you could probably just get some certifications and get to work. But I don't know if that's necessarily the path for most people. So like, what to you made a degree, like going back and getting the full bachelor's degree, more attractive than doing the sort of the micro certification piece and just jumping into the field?
I mean, I guess I just kind of wanted the more solid foundation, I guess, so to speak, that a degree would provide. And I mean, my parents felt that that was the right choice too. They were fairly involved in the decision because I was, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And then I mean, my grandpa, he passed last year, but before that, he had a lot of money set aside for all of the grandchildren to pursue education because he really valued education. And so for us to pursue further education and, and speaking with him about it, he was like, I'll pay for it, but I want you to get the actual degree more so than like any of these other programs. And I was like, all right, well then I guess that's what I'm going to do. And thankfully he covered the whole degree, which extraordinarily generous of him. Yeah. So I do not have any debt really coming out of it.
And that's both fortunate and also an extra good motivation for why to pick the program.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was like, I really want to do this. I think it's the right thing for me to do. The job market's fantastic for it. But I was like, I don't know how I'm going to fund it. Like I can work, and I actually did work full time for most of my time through the degree, which was a whole thing in and of itself. But yeah, when he agreed to, when I presented him with the idea, and he was like, yeah, I'll go ahead and pay for it. So yeah, great to graduate without student debt. Yeah. I have so many friends that are just like, I don't know if I'm ever going to pay off my student debt. Like the world might end before we get there.
Hey, and I mean, I'm getting old enough that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But I remember that feeling, and because of when my grandparents passed, my mom inherited, some money from that. I mean, all of her siblings did, but she stayed and took care of them. And so as my surprise graduation gift, she paid off half of my student loans, nice. But I was still, I don't know, $55,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And that was with half of it paid for, So.
Yeah. And you were out of state technically, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm from Pennsylvania, and I went to
Pennsylvania. Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily change that, but I have friends who did the same thing. I mean, I'm still paying loans, but they're still paying five times, well, not five times, but they're paying, multiple times the amount I am monthly. And so, that can be a tricky thing. Now, as you think about what you're doing compared to what you learned in school, and you recently graduated from ASU, correct?
Yeah, back in May. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just been a few months. How much do you think you're going to use the degree? I mean, that's the goal, right? You're going to.
Yeah, I actually really intend to use this degree. I did not graduate into the best job market around due to, I mean, a lot of places are on like weird hiring policies right now as a result of the pandemic and the economic impact of that and whatnot. But yeah, I fully intend to use this degree, and I'm pretty actively looking for a job in the field. So if anybody knows anybody.
Hey, there you go. This can't hurt. So, I mean, if you think, and I don't know if there's anyone that you keep in touch with from, say, the religion program or the classes, but if you were to finish school with a bachelor's degree in religion, what do most people do with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, they would tell you like all the things that you could do with it. Like they've said that like they've had success with people going to like marketing programs because they kind of learn to like, write to these diverse backgrounds and that kind of thing. And so I tried that for a little bit and no dice. I would like go to their website and like look at like job options and then like look for jobs in that field and set out a couple applications and hear back from 0 of them. Actually, funny enough, I still keep in touch with one of my professors from the program, and I posted yesterday on Facebook that I just graduated at the software degree and was looking for a job, and he messaged me and he was like, hey, I've been trying to like do the same thing. Do you think it's worth it for a degree given the fact that I have a master's and a PhD in another subject? And I was like, no, I would like just self-learn. And I don't know if that would get you anywhere.
See, well, and that's a tricky one because as you said, like you can sort of teach yourself. I mean, there's enough programs online.
Yeah.
Some free, at least for the basic stuff, and then a lot paid as well. But
I did a bit of that too.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was going to get into a degree program. I was like, this is what I want to do. So I'm just going to start working at it, and maybe I can get a job off that.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, though, is because I think in computer science, you can do that easier than with religion. I mean, it's not like anybody can't pick up holy books and then read studies and analysis of it. But I think it's probably pretty hard to swing a job saying, well, I'm self-trained in world religions. Whereas,
well, there's only so many jobs there anyway.
Right. But you can be self-trained in computer science. And if you have, some certifications to actually support it, you can do something with it.
Definitely.
So before, because we're gonna leave that piece behind in a moment here, but I want to ask this question because I have had recent odd Twitter conversations with this guy. He's a teacher somewhere. It's an anonymous account, but and he says that he believes you cannot separate education from religion. And he says that anytime you stand up, you're teaching your class, there's religion involved because there's always ethics. He says, even if you're not intentionally promoting a particular religious view, you still have a sense of right and wrong. And especially if you're in a class in the humanities, it's going to happen. He's like, you're going to do it. And I was like, don't get me wrong. We talk a lot about justice and right and wrong and things like that in my classes, but I try to leave it very open so that it's draw your own conclusions. And as long as the conclusion isn't, it's okay to just randomly hurt people, I'm pretty much fine with most, almost anything else within reason. As someone who has formally studied religion, and then you are a good student and you've been through a decent amount of school, do you think that you can separate, and I know we don't want to do a big religious discussion, I'm saying, but do you think that you can separate education from religion? Is there such thing as an actual secular education from the perspective of someone who has formally studied religion?
That's interesting. I don't know if I can agree with that in a broad strokes kind of way. I mean, in a way, I guess you could argue that lecturing has its roots to an extent in religion, in terms of pastors, because even nowadays they call a pastor preaching. Some churches will call it teaching, and so that's interesting. I didn't feel.
As a parallel to that, I have an uncle who's a Catholic priest, and I tease him sometimes that we basically do the same job. It's just that I have people there who don't want to be, and then he goes, ha ha ha, I have people there who don't want to be. And I say, but you only have to know one book. I have to know a few dozen. That's a returner. But I'm like, I think, there's obviously some ways. But yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about studying religion and what you do with it. This guy makes a passionate argument, and I don't think it's foolproof, and I don't agree with him. But I also don't know that I'm automatically right. Just because I disagree doesn't mean he doesn't have some merit to it. Can you separate them out? Is there a secular education? Because I know you have strong religious views, or at least I know you had them when you were in my class.
Yeah.
Can you actually pull those apart?
I didn't feel much religion in my scientific engineering education. People don't really talk about God in computers or anything, right?
Not unless a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a whole thing in and of itself. That is a tough question. I've certainly never heard that argument before. I've never really thought about it before. To an extent, I think, because at least in American society and in a lot more long-standing societies, I guess, in the world, religion plays a significant role in culture, and to the extent that a lot of times church was the cultural center, be it whatever church, mosque, synagogue, temple was often kind of the social center of settlement cities, what have you, back many years ago. But I don't know,
yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
The roots of education, I guess, so to speak, I guess formal education kind of comes from church at a point where church was, everything.
Yeah, well, and that's where I think I understand his argument better than he understands mine, because I think that if you are a truly, sincerely and devoutly religious person, then you see God everywhere, you see religion everywhere.
Yeah.
So if that's how you see the world, then of course when you look at school, you still see that happening. And so I understand why a person could see that or feel that way. I just don't think that it has to be that, or it has to be intentional. And I think, one of my favorite classes that I took in college was a world religions class.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was knocking off a gen ed, whatever, but I ended up minoring in anthropology. And so some religious stuff came back in. And I just think about how differently, the discussion goes in that class versus a classical literature class, versus modern American lit, where, it's either not there or you're looking at somebody raging against the establishment kind of thing. And
right.
I don't know, like I said, I didn't want to put you on the spot. I just thought, I know that you've given a lot of thought to your religion. and to your faith. And so it's something I've been thinking a lot about since having this sort of back and forth Twitter conversation with this guy, because I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's wrong. But I also, I think I'm never going to convince him of that because he sees it everywhere, you know? And so, you know, it's sometimes it's like how we find value in things. And so I think, you know, if you don't see education as a religious issue, is it purely vocational? You know, and when you talk about, I could have gone to the VoTech program or going back to school to get the specific degree for the job you want, like that's a career training thing. Do you think that's like what high school should be? Like, should people in high school be doing that liberal arts, sort of learn a little about everything, gain awareness of the world? Or do you think it should be at least more common or easier for someone to do the targeted training like maybe you did in your most recent schooling?
That's interesting. I think they both kind of have value. My first thought when you were asking the question was like, maybe it would be a good idea to kind of do that sort of education in high school, so that college could become less expensive. So you could, like, theoretically, I mean, I know my first year, even though my first year was kind of wonky, was a lot of like gen eds and stuff. And even later on into school, I had, you know, a gen ed or two every year. And yeah, I feel like if we could cover a lot of that in high school, then you could cut college down to like 3 years, which they're never going to agree to that. From a financial standpoint, certainly. Yeah.
I mean, I argue sometimes that if we were, and it's not about ramping up pressure or anything like that, just if we didn't feel like we had to teach every little detail of every, you know, moment in history or every detail of all the books we do in English, like, I think you could cut high school down to 2 years or maybe 3, you know, because if we did a better job of it, like if we did a better job of it and condensed some a little bit, you could essentially be knocking out a lot of that gen ed stuff in high school. Because if you think about it, a lot of your gen eds in college are just redoing high school with a bit more depth, or, you know, you learn the same stuff way better is sort of what happens. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a productive thing. You know, you think how much time in your life you could have saved, and then obviously how much money could go with it. I just think as you reflect back, thinking about how maybe, you know, a VoTech program could have been something good for you or something you might have been interested in. Is that something that you think should be like scaled? You know, if you could go back in time and choose just for yourself, just personally, if you could choose between sort of the liberal arts education you got where you took your math and your history and your English and all that, or you could have trimmed it down to maybe just like an English and a math class and then thrown yourself into a particular job field, you know, a particular career, what would you choose now? Like, having been through school and had to make these decisions.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely, if I could go back 10 years, I probably would have told myself like, hey, you know how you're doing this computer science class and you have an A+ in it? You should probably like pursue that. As for like actual education, I do kind of feel like a more focused, I was actually going to say this earlier. I think I remember doing a, sorry, I'm all over the place.
Good.
I remember doing a like Myers-Briggs personality assessment to like kind of get an understanding of like what career paths might be good for my personality type at one point in college. And like, I think that actually could have a lot of value, like to younger kids, you know, and maybe with high schools that have a lot more diverse programs in terms of like more VoTech, or, you know, like Mr. Gregory has, technical education, and he teaches, you know, he said he taught a coding class too, which I think is definitely pretty valuable. And I think they're doing coding in a lot of schools now. I actually, for 6 months, November to May of this year, I worked as like a private teacher for like a place that taught kids coding. And a lot of the kids are like, oh, I've already been doing this in school. And I'm like, you're 7. Like, when I was 7, like, yeah, when I was 7, we like barely had a computer in the house. And now you have like 6.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I mean, I think it's important that I think it's good that we present that.
Absolutely.
I personally think it would be troubling if that was the only thing we did, right? But, you know, if everyone just had to focus on coding and everyone was going to just sort of do this engineering work, because we'd say, well, that's not for everyone. That doesn't reflect the real world and all the rest. Sure. But consider that what I just said probably applies to the way we already do school.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's kind of, I felt like it was a one-track thing through school. And I was like, but there are so many other things that I would like be interested in exploring as career choices. and I never had a chance to really study them except for on my own. Like I said earlier, like I was interested in building musical electronics. There's not a class for that in high school. I did it because like my dad like bought me a kit for Christmas, you know, of like a do-it-yourself guitar pedal. And I was fascinated by it, like hunched over a bench, like just soldering stuff late into the night, you know, like Christmas Day.
Yeah.
You know? And I was like mad when I finished it because I was like, well, now I don't have anything else to do with this. And I enjoyed it a lot, you know, but like there's nothing for that in high school, or at least there wasn't in Loudoun County.
Well, no, and you know, I think, I don't know. What I just said though is about how, you know, if you only did that vocational piece, that isn't right for everyone.
Sure.
And I do think that a lot of people, maybe most people, benefit from having the broad base. Not that you necessarily remember all the facts of everything that you learned. You know, I always pick on the War of 1812. Like no one really needs to know it. And they probably spend, you know, a little too much time on it or whatever. That being said, it didn't hurt you to learn it. And even if you don't remember the details of it, learning it at that time still affected how you saw the history and how you see the world. And so I wouldn't want to deprive people of the opportunity to learn a broad sort of base of knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
That being said, some people know what they want to do and should be able to focus. And I don't know if we provide those options well. Like they're there.
That's what I'm saying.
It's very narrow. Like, you know, say in Loudoun County, where you went to school, where I work, you know, we have a great Academy of Science. We have a vocational technical school. Like we have those things, but we only have one of each for a large county. And so who gets in? The kids who have like the best attendance and the best grades, when sometimes the kids who would do the best or need it the most have low grades and bad attendance because they hate the classes they're already in. Like they're literally not getting the chance to get into the thing that would be good for them because they didn't already do good at the other stuff. And so I think that we need to expand that. That's my view. And so my question, I guess, for you with that, and you can sort of talk about your own experience more if you want, but if you were given the opportunity to create a school, you know, think like charter school, private school, very little oversight and regulation, just as long as no one's getting hurt. But you have a budget, you can have whatever kind of building, facilities, faculty you want. What kind of school would you create? Like if you were going to be the principal or superintendent or whatever, what would you feel good about like leading young people through? Yeah.
For one, I do agree that like, I think a lot of people do benefit from the broad base, like liberal arts education and the broad base thing that they get in high school. But I don't think it's for everybody. Like I'll use this to get into my point to answer your question. I think about a friend that I had in childhood who I still keep up with a little bit, and who like he is fantastic at like working on cars and stuff. Like that is absolutely, like I see the stuff he does, like he posts it on Facebook and stuff, and I like see it and I'm like, I have no idea where to even begin in that. And he struggled a ton in school because he just didn't like the classes he was, you know, taking, that didn't interest him in that kind of thing. And like if he had a program where he could have gotten into that kind of thing, like starting in high school, he could probably be extraordinarily successful doing what he's doing. He just kind of does it as a hobby right now. And I mean, he's a little bit of a drifter by his own personality anyway. But yeah, I think about him a lot when I think about education because he's extraordinarily intelligent. But I feel like he got failed by the traditional education system that failed to recognize his intelligence, and like that there are different intelligences, you know, that's like a psychiatric or psychological thing. I remember studying an AP Psych in high school that like it's considered that there are different intelligences in, you know, the world.
I think it's Howard. Is it Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences?
Anyway, I not tell you
as a teacher who's taken the classes, I'm supposed to know that name. But the theory of multiple intelligences.
Yeah, exactly.
There's sort of a lot of different ways to be smart and good at stuff.
Yeah, and I feel like school only really caters to a couple of those. So I feel like if we were to kind of spend more time like thinking about all that and like creating an educational system around that, and understanding that there are kids who are going to be better at, you know, building and fixing cars than they are going to be at, you know, high level calculus, right? And that they're never going to really need high level calculus and that kind of thing. And so, I mean, not everybody takes calculus in high school, but
we sure try though. We push as many kids into algebra in 6th and 7th grade as we can, because you know, and how many people are good at calculus but, you know, can't do simple arithmetic in their head. Anything like
I can't remember anything from calculus, but I like when I was working in the beer industry, they used to tell me like, all right, we're gonna like keg this many gallons off this tank, how many kegs do we need? And I would be like, And I just like add it up in my head, not even like write it down and tell them like, this is what you need. And, this is how many kegs you need to have clean in order to like, keg off this tank. And like,
Actual
that's a practical skill,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I mean, I took years of calculus. I even took all the way up through multivariable calculus at Virginia Tech, differential equations and all that. I couldn't tell you a single thing about any of them now. But like, yeah, I'm able to, like there's math that is practical to some things. There's math that's practical to a lot of things. And I saw a lot of people taking calculus at college. I'm getting way off the point. In college who like didn't really ever need it and like have not used it in their field. But back to the actual question of like ideal school. I know standardized testing is still a hot button issue, but I personally, even though I always did well on standardized tests, I don't know that that's like a thing that is all that valuable to some people, and similarly, I actually did take notes on this because I found this question really interesting.
And it's a lot to think about, and that's where like when you start sort of doing like, well, the calculus in college and the rest. Like the reason I'm smiling as you're doing this is because if you're giving a good answer to it, you have to think about all of it. And this is actually something I've seen is because I've asked this question to a bunch of people on the podcast and I don't mean anything negative about anyone I've had on. Everybody's been really great and friendly and stuff like that. But there are people who come on for just to have this like general conversation and make school better. And there's some people who come on with the purpose of like promoting what they're doing or to talk about a specific idea. And you can usually tell when you get to this question because the answer of how to improve school or what's the ideal school just sort of gets like a simple brush off. And you can tell the people who gave it sincere thought because they start talking about other stuff. Yeah. Because school does
I have a lot of thoughts on this and like, they're
it's
very
a weird web.
Yeah. Disparate. Yeah. But I guess kind of the main point is that I just feel I saw a lot of people get failed by like the traditional education system. And like these people are going through life thinking they're stupid because, of the multiple intelligences. To circle back to that, there's, only a couple that I actually feel the traditional schooling model that at least I grew up in really caters to. And that there's a lot of other ways that, you can be intelligent. And I think like modern school kind of fails them. So I'm thinking back to like personality assessments. That's why I brought it up earlier, is because I had it in my notes for this question actually, is that I think there's some value to that kind of thing, like being able to kind of understand a kid's psychology and like how their mind works and how they learn and that kind of thing. And, maybe like as they're going into high school, kind of help them consider and give them like, hey, these are career options you might want to consider, and these are things that like you might actually find you enjoy, or like have them take some kind of test and like just, I don't know, like if we had enough counselors in the world that could sit down with every kid and be like, what do you enjoy? And if they say Fortnite, they should, I don't know, like let's go ahead and like try to put you in like a computer programming class, Yeah. Or if they're like, I don't know, I like working with my dad in the garage, like building, wood stuff. Like I actually did a lot of shop work with my dad growing up and like enjoyed that. And like, why am I not a carpenter now? You can make good money doing that.
Yeah, no. And it's funny you say that. I remember in middle school doing like it was like a career inventory thing. And it was this weird, like little room with no windows, but it had all these different, and there was like a little soldering thing, and there was like a small engine repair. And then there was like something with computers. It was very basic. And there was one that was like, it was just typing or keyboarding, and and it was very simplified.
It was a job. Yeah.
It was like a small room and all this, but in the end, they gave you like this printed out, like looked very official, like test results, and it said what you did and what it looked like you would be better or worse at. And I walked out of there thinking, it was like 7th grade, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to be a small engine mechanic. Like I'm going to fix lawnmowers for the rest of my life. I liked it, and I did really well at it in that thing.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is I think it's kind of funny, because now, like, I mean, I can fix some stuff, but I'm not a mechanic, it's something I can do, but I watch a lot of YouTube videos to do it well. Like it doesn't come naturally. But I think that sometimes we have to be careful, because just as you said, you take the test and the test can make it look like you're dumb and you were smart another way. Sometimes you can take that test and it tells you you're good at something, and then you think that's what I have to do. Like there's some concerns about doing the Myers-Briggs, and you get your 4 letters and they match it up.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say a lot, but there are many colleges that actually use that, either in helping with counseling or in helping students to like choose majors.
That's why I took it as on recommendation of my advisor. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I actually like the test. I think it's very cool, But I read some articles recently that very few places outside of American universities give it that kind of credibility that you would
Makes
ever
sense. Yeah.
very few places and very few legitimate psychological researchers would tell you to make decisions in your life based on your test results. But a lot of colleges do it. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't. My point there is that just as easy as a test can tell you that you're dumb when you weren't, I think sometimes they can tell you, hey, you should pursue these things and you shouldn't. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a guy who says get rid of all the tests, but I think we have to be very cautious about what results tell us.
Yeah.
But
Because tests themselves can be rigid.
so
And humans are not rigid.
Yeah. And to your point, if you had enough counselors and you could do the tests, then you could say, hey, you should consider these things. I love that conversation. But I would not be comfortable grabbing a kid in 7th, 8th, 9th grade and saying, here's what you scored on the test, and here's what the test says about you, because it sort of becomes maybe an accidental self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And if the test wasn't as good as we thought it was, we just made the same mistake on the other side. You know what I mean? Like I think the counselor giving the recommendation for check this stuff out is great. But I would actually say, don't give the kid the test results.
Yeah.
So that way they don't like set a certain target that may or may not be right for them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like a career inventory, a skills inventory, something like that. If you were to do that in a school, what would you do with it? I mean, because if we're being practical, and I want you to be idealistic, in the idea of the ideal school, school.
Yeah.
But to a certain extent, I think if you actually had to put it into action, rubber meets the road. What would you offer in the school that allowed students to pursue those diverse interests or abilities? Like, are you thinking something that's a little more vocational technical, like a more hands-on program, or a blend? And that's always the tough part is when you say, like, here's where I want to go. Like, what would that look like? Would kids spend half their day in a shop and half the day in an English class, or like, would they go all in on vocational stuff? Like, what would that look like to do it? And I'm only asking you that detail because I think it's interesting. You're the first person that suggested using interests and some testing to back it up to help kids make the call. Like, and this is the 40th episode. You're the first person that said that or anything.
Really?
To it. Yeah. But my question then is, that's just your starting point. Mm-hmm. So what does the school or the school day look like? Like, what do you do once you have that result, once the kid or the parents say, this is what I want to check out?
Yeah. Well, even doing it in high school, this is a slight divergence, but even that, like, it's contentious because, like, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, like you said, the 8-10 years that follow that, like, age are like, you grow and change so much. Like, I am hardly the same person you knew 10 years ago in your English class. I mean, I think there are some personality traits that haven't changed, but, like, my mind is expanded quite a bit more, and I've realized there's a world far beyond me and my understanding, And so even that can get kind of contentious, but, like, I do think, I mean, if high school is kind of where it's like your jumping off point to your career, I do think it would be really valuable, I think, to offer more like VoTech kind of programs early on, and maybe even just have them integrated into the normal schools too, like that imagine if, like, all 18 or whatever high schools in Loudoun County had, like, some kind of VoTech built into the school already, like some kind of lab where maybe they're just able to take, like, an online course through, like, a third party sort of thing. Of course, it'd have to be vetted and whatnot, but where they could, like, just start exploring these skills. Like, everybody just has, like, I'm just developing this on the spot, but, like, there's just, like, a VoTech lab room in the school, and, like, maybe in lieu of study hall or something like that, you're able to just go and, like, kind of take all these, the school will buy a license to, like, Udemy or something like that, and kids can, like, kind of get their feet wet in a couple different topics and explore.
Like a maker space or a learning lab, and
I think that'd be fantastic. Yeah,
and for practical application, and I say practical, and this might not be more practical, but it would at least be one way to do it. The one thing I think I've heard that was kind of similar is Ian Sirotkin, who's actually on the school board now. I talked to him when he was still running for office. He said that he's like, it's not something we're going to get done or anything, but he said his ideal would be that if every high school had a specialized program. So if you had your theater and arts school, and you had your engineering school, and you had your, medical and biology and that, like, and then kids could go and you just went. And so on the, like say
that
A
was your high
day,
school.
you do your traditional class, and on B day, you're doing the thing that's specialized there, rather than what we do now where you spend A day at your home school and then B day you go to some other building for that technical program.
Right.
His idea is he's like, I don't know how we'd figure out transportation and busing. He's like, there's a million logistical problems, but he said, I would love for each school to have its specialty. And then you want to specialize in that, you go to that school, you know? And I thought like, and that's sort of similar to what you're talking about, except he's saying just go all the way and specialize the schools. You're sort of
having
saying,
each school be a thing, and then a kid can kind of pick their school from there.
And you're sort of saying like, just create the space and the opportunity to explore what you want within the school already, which if we're being honest, is probably easier to implement than what he's.
I think that's actually a really practical solution that I just kind of pulled out of a hat. But.
I think it's something you can do. Would in either retrospect, thinking about your own education or thinking like if you were a parent and you had to send, would you be comfortable going to that school if you were the kid, or would you be comfortable sending your children there someday, or like something like that? Like,
I think I would have thrived in that environment. That was kind of like what my parents let me do around the house. You know, they would like, if I like showed an interest in something, they would like, you know, buy the like toys or, you know, kits that were like kid friendly for me to like explore that thing, you know? And they were really, really supportive of that. And I think I absolutely would have thrived in an environment where it's kind of honestly like free time, but you have to be doing something like educational, which that's also a logistical nightmare, I guess, is policing all the kids to make sure that they're actually like doing something. But I think maybe in a way, like if you just kind of allow the kids to explore topics they're interested in, you know, that like maybe it wouldn't require all that much supervision.
If you have the opportunity to do something you actually want to do, you might not need the policing. You know?
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It feels less compulsory because there's something there that you care about and you want to do.
Right. Absolutely. And like, I mean, they don't have to like tie into or like lock into a certain, you know, thing. It's just, they have this space to be exploring. And I don't know, there's got to be, I know, like I said, Udemy earlier, that's how I started kind of learning, more programming stuff like in the second round of school when I was like trying to get my way into a program and doing it on my own. Like I think that's a great platform for learning all sorts of things. I mean, I've taken programming classes on there, you know, there's like, you can learn guitar, you know, you can learn pretty much anything. I think, you know, platforms like that are fantastic. And if like schools were just able to use some of the like, I mean, fees of the, you know, or taxes or whatever, fees instead of taxes. What am I saying?
It's sort of the same thing.
Yeah, it's good. It kind of is the same thing. It's just government fees, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if like they were able to use like some finance towards, you know, being able to just let kids take all sorts of courses, I think that'd be fantastic. And I personally would have really enjoyed a time to explore a bunch of different topics and kind of a more free form, learn at your own pace way, which is something we can get into regarding online education, because being able to learn at my own pace was a big thing for me.
So real quick with that, both with the sort of platform that you just suggested, and then also maybe incorporating, or we'll use this transition to quick talk about, you know, online school and doing a virtual program, thinking about the stress, the anxiety, the depression, the things that come with school for some people. And for some people, it's the whole way through school. For some people, it's in moments of stress. It probably started around when you were in high school and has gotten worse since. But if you look at the data, anxiety and depression rates in high school students are way up, especially for young women. They're actually even like, for some reason right now, and there's a lot of theories on why, but those numbers have been climbing, right? And so in your experience, do you think that changing that academic program or creating that extra freedom in the academic piece could offer help? I mean, obviously it would help at least some kids, but do you think that could be like a partial solution to some of that? Or do you think that maybe some of the extra stress and all those other mental health pieces, does maybe that come from more of like the culture of school overall? Like, could you just shift the class, or, hey, every other day you get 2 hours to do what you want? Do you think that would make a difference for a lot of kids in terms of how they feel about themselves or feel about school? Or do you think that we would have to do something bigger in terms of the way we do grades or the way we handle relationships, things like that? Like, would that be enough to help with the mental health piece as well? Obviously, it sounds like an improvement in academics. Do you think it would do something personal?
I mean, for me, I think like the concept that I've been making up on my own right now has
good.
been like,
Good.
like the idea of it sounds really freeing to me as somebody who always kind of felt bothered by like what I call the rigidity of, the traditional education. Because I felt like there was a path, like even they give you like the course catalog and it's like, well, here's the like 4 prerequisites you need before you could take like senior level English. And it's, there's like a defined path to get to pretty much everything. And a defined path to like getting to graduation and whatnot. And I think like if there was just a little bit more open space and just a little more time for, students to explore, I think that would probably help a little bit. I do think a lot of it is just like due to the nature of school overall and like the pressure to perform, and, colleges are only getting harder to get into. And there's even the fact that like on the other side of college, like you're still going to graduate with like mountains of debt. And that kind of thing. So kids are realizing that too at younger and younger ages, and I think they're kind of, I think a lot of people, not to like get too political, but a lot of people are trapped in jobs they don't like because they have other things to pay for, and a lot of people start out in those jobs they don't like because they're, in student debt, and they're like, well, if I can get a job where I'm making $60K a year, I can live pretty well and make, and start making some decent, strides in paying off my student debt. And then 20 years later they're still doing some random clerical office job.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's because it's what you got into, and then all of a sudden then
life happens around it.
Then I bought a house, or then I had a kid, and now I couldn't leave the job, so I needed the money. Exactly. I said this, I don't think I probably used this language, but I actually talked about this on an early episode with Esther Kim, who I think you went to school with.
Yes, she was my year. If I
I think so.
I definitely know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I came up once since, but I really think that student loans, and I understand why they exist and all that, but I really do think that in a way, like student loans, people used to say religion is the opiate of the masses. I think student loans are the opiate of the masses now, because it's a modern indentured servitude. Like you're going to do this thing, but you're going to pay it off for the next 20 years. So from the age of 22 to 42, somebody else owns you, and you can't get rid of it. You can't file bankruptcy to get rid of it. Like you're going to pay this off one way or another.
Yeah.
And when you always owe someone else, you're never really free. And so you're not, what are you going to do? Like, I'm not going to jeopardize all this other stuff. Like, yeah, I'm just going to shut my face and I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to be a good, I'm going to be a good cog in that machine because I have to be.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that all debt's a bad thing or anything like that. I think that student loan debt is particularly threatening because people are taking on what is essentially a mortgage payment for like a house. And this is someone else actually said this, but you're essentially buying a house without ever being in the house. Like, you don't know what job you're going to get, but you take on all this debt for this degree, and you don't even know where it's going. You just paid for a house and you haven't lived in it yet. And what happens if you get there and you hate it? You still have to pay for it if there's no way out. And I really think we corner people financially in that way. And so you say, like, not to get political, I think most people, regardless of political party, would agree it's a problem. I think people disagree very heavily on what would be better, but I think it's a big problem. And maybe if we could do a better job in high school, maybe fewer people would need to go to college. Or to your earlier point, maybe we could shorten college so at least it costs you less because you could get some of that started ahead of time.
Yeah.
Like there's got to be a way to do that better.
I'm not like anti-college as a concept, but I do think a lot of people should spend time evaluating whether or not college is the right thing for them. Because as I've said, and this is even after having, 2 bachelor's degrees, I don't know if college is ever the right thing for me.
You're like here I am.
Here I am, right? And it sounds ridiculous because, I come from a place of privilege, certainly saying that, because I'm lucky enough to have, not had a lot of student debt chasing me around for the rest of my life due to family money. So I certainly recognize the privilege in that statement, but I maybe we don't have to have everybody go to college. I think there's a lot of, I always felt like there was a stigma, I guess, towards like vocational stuff and, like trade schools and whatnot. And it's not like an intentional stigma. It's not like people are walking around like, don't be a plumber. That's lame, but actually Mr. Gregory said it on his episode, like that, if you watch like TV shows, the plumber is the guy with his, hunch down over your sink with his, butt crack showing and that kind of thing. But like the reality of it is they're not that at all.
Yeah.
They're usually very professional in demeanor, and they're good at what they do. And they're not like these bumbling, chubby morons, Like I met a guy who does HVAC when I was working as a bartender, and he looked more clean cut than I did, and he made $200K a year doing HVAC and that kind of thing, and never went to college, paid off his trade school in his like first 2 years, and like, I'm like, man, I should have. Yeah, I'm sitting there, making maybe 30 grand a year as a bartender. I'm like, man, I should have done that. Like,
yeah,
I could do that. Yeah.
Just like anything else, it's not for everyone, but
Right.
I think it's for more people than we admit in high school.
Absolutely. And I think
so people figure it out later. It ends up being a backup plan that in some cases turns into a really good one. Like,
yeah. And I think, because there's a lot of money to be made in the trades, like I had a friend growing up whose dad is an electrician. He makes a solid amount of money every single year. He makes more than enough to, support his family of 4.
Yeah. I have a neighbor who's an electrician. He like barely graduated high school and,
yeah,
but now the guy makes easily double what I make,
Yeah.
No
Right.
student loan debt. His wife stays home with kids. And like, I'm like, yeah, no, I work. My wife works. I tutor after school, like a lot of good that master's degree did, as it turns out. And I'm not saying I would necessarily trade either. I'm just saying like,
sure.
I think maybe we somehow misrepresent these things. And as you said, maybe it's passively, but I don't know that we do anyone a service by not letting people more fully explore the options or look at what the job market really is going to look like. Now, I want to hit on this quickly because you just finished an online degree.
Yeah.
And I am about to begin for the first sort of legitimate time teaching online classes, and, most of the country is thinking about the student experience. And if you want to throw out some advice for teachers, I'm all ears for that too. But
sure.
Thinking about, having gone through traditional public high school and then the in-person on-campus bachelor's degree, and then you did it online. Like, what's the difference from the student perspective, or what did you learn? Like, did you like it more? You like it less? What does it offer? Because a lot of people look into it. I think a lot of people look into it for convenience or cost, which is fine. But if in the end you either didn't get the education you wanted, or if you're unhappy with it, don't do that.
Right.
But some people really like it, and you just finished. And so clearly it worked out, at least so far, you're through.
Yeah.
And you don't
I was a big fan.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you feel about it, and what does that look like from the student side?
Yeah. So as I've mentioned before, like I have a very like learn by doing learning style, and like kind of a more, I don't know, exploratory jazz, like I guess is a good way to like, a good analogy for it, in that it's kind of like more improvisational, and, there's like a structure, but I learn best just kind of by, being able to play in the sandbox, so to speak. And so when I went to Virginia Tech, I took almost all lecture courses, and, I would go to the lectures and I'd sleep through a decent chunk of them. And it wasn't because I found it boring or whatever. It's just because it didn't do anything for me, Like I could sit there and like stare at the board straight ahead, and it would still be like one ear out the other. Right. And I just didn't feel like I got anything from it. And what I got, or what I actually like felt like I was really gaining something from it, is when I would, sit down and, I'd have to have a couple hours, right? I couldn't, cram in an assignment at the last minute, but I'd sit down and be able to like actually fiddle with it and, take it apart, sometimes literally take it apart and, look at how it worked and be able to understand it from that aspect. And so that's what I really liked about my online education through Arizona State, is there were no set class times. There were like lecture videos, but you didn't really have to watch them if you didn't want to. And
so you were like, all, to use the buzzwords of the day, you were all asynchronous. Like you didn't have class times, and
pretty much
you did it on your own.
Stuff. I mean, there were due dates for assignments, but like you were not required to be online at a certain point to like watch the lecture. Like some of these lectures have been recorded like 2-3 years ahead of like when I was actually watching them, and like they are just able to use them for the course down the line. And sometimes it would be a completely different professor that would record the course's lectures, like the professor that kind of created the curriculum. And then it'd be a different instructor that was actually, like doing the day-to-day stuff. Right. And so I really liked that because I didn't have to sit through lectures if I didn't want to. And sometimes I would visit it, like go through the lectures to get the detailed explanations, but I would like fast forward to the part that I didn't get. And then I would watch that through and be like, oh, okay, I get that now. And, so being able to kind of visit the lectures at my own pace was fantastic. And then, again, like being able to just, have the time, like, and sit down with an assignment and figure out what I needed to understand conceptually and then how to apply it, which application is huge for me. If I can't see how to apply something immediately, I'm going to have a really hard time retaining it. It's kind of the same thing. Like I was talking with a friend the other day about how I meet people. He said that I had met him like 2 years prior to when I'd actually met him, but I was just being like tussled around at this party, meeting people. But like, if I can talk to somebody and like know a fact about them, I'm going to remember them for like years and years and years, even if I don't see them again. And it's the same thing for me. I can remember things so much better when I'm actually able to kind of see it in action or, get something practical or concrete about it, versus like learning abstract calculus and, they're telling me like, oh, well, here's just how the problem works. And I'm like, okay, when am I going to use this?
How can I ever see the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
That, by the way, is when I started being, I don't want to say bad at math, but that's when I stopped being good at math when my teachers stopped being able to tell me when I was actually going to use it. Like when they could no longer draw a picture on the board or like set up a situation, like even something as stupid as like watermelons in the back of a car. Like I'm in, I can visualize this. Like,
right. Yeah, I need to be able to visualize it. Absolutely.
When it turned into there was no application. And like all of a sudden, I didn't look like I was good at math anymore. So I mean, thinking about that, because that means you have a lot of freedom and choice both in the scheduling, but in sort of where you put your time for your studies. Mm-hmm. That's very much what I would prefer. And last spring,
I excelled, honestly.
Well, and I say prefer. I mean, I like being in the classroom. I like talking to people live. I like having class discussions, and that you were in the class. Like we do a lot of talking. I ask you to do a whole lot of reading on your own.
Is not at all conducive to an online education.
Right. And so, this is where this is tricky. But last spring when it was like, okay, we're actually going to start doing, everything shut down. And then it was sort of hang out for a couple of weeks. And now we got to do something. I talked to a bunch of people sort of farther up the pay grade than me. And I said, we really shouldn't be doing too much with this required class time. If someone wants to do a lecture or something, that's fine. But there's no reason that I can't record a video on a Sunday night, tell everybody you have all week to do whatever you want with it. And the work that goes along with it is due by next Sunday. Like we don't need to require the timings. We don't need to do that because we have the tools to just provide the learning.
Yeah.
And then, hey, there's a class meeting. You can show up and ask questions, whatever. And that's basically what I did. This year, what we're doing in Loudoun County, what a lot of places are doing, is essentially trying to run regular school online. And I'm saying I personally, as a teacher, I don't want to judge it before I've done it, but I think I would prefer to just do regular school to online. But I think what you just described, for me, makes more sense and provides a lot more flexibility both for the teacher and the student. We're about to engage in school where students are going to show up and check into homeroom at 9 a.m. and we're going to take attendance, and you're going to sit there for 15 minutes and talk about stuff. And then we're going to do 82 minutes or something a first block, and then a 15-minute break, and then 82 minutes a second block. And we're going to take attendance for each one of them. And you have there's still an asynchronous piece because you're still going to do something, but we're now running like a regular school day online. And I think that's going to be a really tricky thing to do well because
it's hard.
Yeah. It's already hard to be.
I can't even imagine doing it because I had to do that a little bit when I was teaching programming back in the spring. Because there was a physical space, right? But like it got to a point where they were like, well, we can't have people coming in. I still had to go in because of child safety reasons, but it was just the teachers that were there, And so, it was really weird having to be on a Zoom call with students and then, having to, if I had more than one student on the Zoom call, I'd have to be like, all right, you need to share your screen now. And then, it's going to take over your screen. So you're not going to be able to see what you're doing. And it was extraordinarily difficult and just drove me up the wall because having to teach, if it was a one-on-one, way easier, but the more people you added, the more hectic it got. And it was just really the connection of the personal connection wasn't there, which is something I really loved, is just being able to sit down with a kid and be like, okay, so here's the problem. Let's think it over. It's harder to do when you're at a distance.
Yeah,
You know?
and with, regular class sizes, because originally they were going to do half the class. So you're
Mhm.
going to have, 14, 15 kids one day and then the other 14, 15 the other day.
Yeah.
So it was A day, B day, B day, and it was going to
Mhm.
be split. But now we're doing a full class. So I'm going to have an AP English class with 26 kids, and I see them Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I don't see them again until the next Tuesday, Wednesday. But
Yeah.
I've got to have something productive to do for 82 minutes each of those days. And that's really tough. And I say it's tough. It's tough for them. Like, I talk a lot.
Yeah.
I'll sit there and talk at them for 82 minutes just to earn my paycheck. I don't care. The thing is, I don't think that that's good for them, and it's going to be really tricky to navigate how to keep things moving in a way that keep people entertained and in sync. So it's interesting that you said that. I didn't realize that your most recent degree was all asynchronous,
Mhm.
which is, again, that would be my preference for this. I would love to still have the class meeting, but then it's just show up to chat or if you have questions.
Like an optional class meeting. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
had they would do Zoom office hours every single week,
yeah.
you
But
know?
the
And
required class times are going to be tough.
yeah.
From your experience, and you can think about that situation, but even doing it asynchronously, if you were going to give a piece of advice or two to students or to teachers or both, like, what's something that you've learned through doing a full bachelor's degree online that you think people should know before they start? Like, I haven't started yet, so what's something I should know now that otherwise, like, I'm going to figure it out in April, but you could tell me now? Like, what's something that you would recommend to a teacher or a student as they're starting into online school?
Well, just on a very general level, it's going to be different, and it's going to be way more different than you expect. I ended up kind of sliding into it a lot more naturally just because I found really quick that this is absolutely how I learn if I'm allowed to be a little bit more freeform. I can't necessarily speak to the actual class times things. I never really experienced that, right? But it's not going to be easy. Sometimes you have to, if you're watching a lecture and you have a question, you'll have to email the teacher, and it could be a day or two before you hear back, right? And that could actually be kind of preventing you from getting anywhere on your assignment versus where in a real class you could raise your hand, which the aspect of raising your hand in these virtual classes, it's going to be a little bit different, which I think there is a literal raise your hand feature on some sorts of video conferencing software.
In Zoom, there is. We do all Google Meet.
Yeah.
I don't think it has that yet. We also don't have breakout rooms, so we can't do small group discussions easily yet.
Oh, really?
I can tell everyone to leave class and join a new class with 5 of their classmates.
Oh, God.
And then,
yeah.
and then come back to class later on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so we do a lot of discussion in my class. So I'm I'm going to try it, but I have very low expectations.
Yeah.
So the communication with the teacher is going to be, or with the students, vice versa, is going to be really important.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
It's going to be very different and tough. I think it could be better for the students than they will be for the teachers. I think some students will actually find that they will learn a lot better at this distance education thing. Like I did, because I guess I did a couple online classes at Tech, but they were still, it would sometimes be you have to take the quiz online, but you had to go to an actual lecture, that kind of thing. But yeah, I found out pretty quick, I really like the online asynchronous learning, which is not exactly what Loudoun County is doing, but I think I think it's a great option if you can learn like that,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think it's going to work well for some students. I don't think it's going to work well for a lot of students.
I think it's going to be a problem for a lot of students, yeah.
But I also think that that's not necessarily an unfair thing, because I think what we do in school works pretty well for a lot of students, but it doesn't work great for a lot of students too. So any argument we're going to make about this, we could probably make the same argument about regular school. The only thing that shifts is the ratio of students doing well or poorly, but both those populations exist in both scenarios. So to think that this is somehow drastically different in terms of student experience, I don't know if that's true. You just might have more students who are liking or disliking it.
Or you might notice the dynamics of that reverse, the students that would have hated it in school are going to be this is great, Yeah.
This is I don't have to wear pants. This is wonderful.
Oh gosh. Yeah. It's the dream, right?
All right. So we're going to get ready to wrap up, and I have one question and then sort of open mic. But first, I'm going to ask you for some recommendations for books or movies that you like.
Yeah.
And they can be education, career, or just purely personal enjoyment, stuff that you've enjoyed reading or watching that you would recommend to other people. And then we're done with that. You have a moment of open mic. You can say or promote anything you want, and we'll wrap this thing up. So first, for the recommendations, what you got? What should I be reading or watching?
Well, I'm a big movie guy, so I've got a couple of movies. The first I'm going to say is Baby Driver, which I don't know. Yeah, fantastic movie. It's just is a really unique and original movie. It's kind of like it's an R-rated like crime thriller, very well directed action. It's got a killer soundtrack, and it integrates into the movie in a very unique way. And it's probably from one of the directors that I regard as being one of the most unique directors working today, Edgar Wright. Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz.
Okay, I didn't know that was the same guy.
Pilgrim.
That's cool.
Yeah. I think he's great. He's really only made like original movies, which he's one of the few Hollywood that's actually doing that right now.
That is interesting. And you know what? I put that movie on not expecting anything at all from it. I was like, oh whatever. And then I was like 15 minutes in and I was like glued to the TV. Oh, it's hard for me. Like, I watch a movie and I have to either take a break halfway through or I have to be careful because like I'm on my phone or my attention strays easily. And I was engaged fully the whole time. So that's a great recommendation.
Yeah, I showed it to my sister and I was like, she's not going to like this movie. And afterwards she was like, that movie was awesome. The funny thing is she lives in Atlanta and there's a brief moment where like the main character walks into a record store and that record store is like around the corner from her house. So we went there right after watching the movie, which like made it even more real, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome.
Because it filmed all in Atlanta, which it takes place in Atlanta within the context of the movie, yeah. The second one is Parasite, which a lot of people will probably know from being the Academy Award winner.
I haven't watched it yet. It's the first Best Film winner. It was not in English. It was
I think it is the first foreign film because it's a South Korean production. So I think it's the first foreign film to have won an Oscar. Yeah. I have like a betting pool with a couple friends that like are all really into movies, and one of my friends throws a whole like big Oscar party, and there's a betting pool involved in it. And I was basically like, Parasite should win because I think I saw a lot of movies in 2019. I see a lot of movies every year, and I was like, Parasite is the best picture of this year, at least out of what I saw, which is a lot of the big movies that were up for Oscar contention. But I was like, there's no way it's going to win because foreign films don't win Best Picture. It'll probably get a lot of the technical awards and possibly Best Screenplay, but I was like, there's no way it's going to win. So I bet against it. And then I like lost the bet. I think I actually had it written down and then changed it because I was like, there's just no way it's not going to win. And then when it actually won, I was like, oh my God, like I would have just won $150 if I had just gone with my gut. Yeah. I was so mad. But yeah, it's an incredible movie. Bong Joon-ho is a virtuosic filmmaker, and it's interesting to see the way like different cultures approach filmmaking because the South Korean film industry is relatively young compared to the American film industry. So it's really interesting to see the way that they've taken a lot of influences from other nations and their film traditions and kind of formed their own around it. And Bong Joon-ho is probably like the superstar of South Korean filmmaking, who's crossed over into the American market a couple times. But Parasite's probably his biggest success.
Nice. Yeah. So it's saved on a list somewhere. So
on
your recommendation, I'll go ahead and watch it.
I believe it's streaming on Hulu. I'm still a big physical copy guy, so I got one like as soon as it came out. But I believe it's on Hulu. It's been on there for a while.
Yep.
So it's a big recommendation. The third, I only have 4, and then I have a book recommendation. Well, I guess I could have 2 book. I'll have 2 book recommendations. The third is May It Last, which is a music documentary about the Avett Brothers, who are one of my favorite bands.
I was going to ask you about the hat.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Avett Brothers, and they had a documentary. It was actually produced by, maybe even directed by, Judd Apatow of, Goofy Teen Movie fame. And so it's just, they kind of go through their recording the album True Sadness, which came out in 2016. And it's interesting to see like these kind of small town, like North Carolina mountain boys who are working with Rick Rubin, who is like one of the biggest names in music production and has been working with them since like 2009. And just kind of seeing them like navigate this big world in which they are now pretty famous and still like retain their humility. And I just also have a thing for like music documentaries, being a musician myself, kind of like to see how the sausage gets made. So it's cool to just see them like interacting and like the positive relationships. Because usually when you see a music documentary, it's about people arguing and hating each other, but there's just like a lot of love and it's just really wholesome, you know?
Nice.
So it's kind of a little different. And then my final movie recommendation is The Social Network, which is the movie about Facebook, which is a huge like jumping off point for me in terms of like getting into more serious filmmaking. I think it's just an incredible movie. I think David Fincher is one of the best living directors, and I would recommend it to pretty much anybody. It's a tight 2 hours, and it's one of those movies that, like, similar to Baby Driver, I'm just glued to the screen the whole darn time it's on. So
yeah, and it's one that I feel like would have been so easy to go wrong on so many times. Like the idea that a movie about a guy and a software company, like I mean, how much can you do with it? And then it's a really good movie. I mean, like,
it's
even
a human story, you know.
Yeah, but
it's
even
about
like the cinematography is good. Like it looks good and it's interesting. And
it could be about a guy inventing a dominant vacuum company, and it'd still be just as interesting.
I remember when that started winning awards, and I was like, "That's ridiculous."
It should have won the Oscar.
Yeah,
when was the last time anybody thought about the King's Speech?
yeah,
that's what won over it that year, right?
Which was also a good movie, but I agree.
Sure.
I don't think it was as good a movie, but I just, because I always wait. I'm late on everything. I let everybody else decide what they think is good or bad. And then it's later on I check it out, and then
That's me too. Yeah, I am sitting on a huge list of Netflix recommendations that dates back like 8 years at this point.
Yeah,
I still haven't finished House of Cards. House of Cards has been off air for like 5 years.
Yeah,
I'm not going to.
I quit halfway through, but for example, my wife and I just started watching Mad Men.
Oh yeah,
summer, you know.
I watched the first 2 episodes and was like, "This is great," and didn't continue.
Yeah, no, that's I wait on things, but that was how I felt about Social Network, and then I watched it and I was like, "Oh no, that was a really good movie."
Yeah, I saw it in the theater like the opening weekend. I was super excited for it. I was like, "This is going to be a great movie." And I took a whole bunch of friends who you probably had as students as well, and they were all like, "This is going to be a weird movie." And then we all walked out of it, and they were like, "That was the best movie I've ever seen." And I was like, "Thank you." Like,
I did not steer you wrong. Yeah, no, that one was good. That was good. Awesome.
Yeah. So for books, I have recently been reading, I just started it like last week. Former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang wrote a book called The War on Normal People, which talks about something that it definitely relates to education. We didn't really get into it, but actually we kind of, in a roundabout way, we did. His big platform is universal basic income, which is very much related to the way that he sees our economy going, with automation and a lot of like basic low-level jobs being forced out in the name of efficiency, and all these people that are going to get completely left behind as a result of it. And so he argues for a dramatic reskilling of the workforce, and even to an extent like a new approach to education in the way, basically the approach to how we look at the first 20 years of life, the developmental stage, and then past that too.
It was awesome. I
haven't finished it yet. I'm not very far in, but
it's good.
Fascinated.
I read it maybe about a year ago, a little less than a year ago.
It came out a year or two ago. Yeah.
I read it like last winter, and it's fantastic because I had already read. I don't know if you've read Homo Deus by Noah Yuval Harari, or I always switch his first and middle names. But he wrote a book called Sapiens, which is like a history of the human species, going all the way back to like, early hominid stuff. And this is what it's been like to be a human being all the way up till today. And it's fantastic. His next book was called Homo Deus, where he basically projects into the future, and he looks at genetic engineering in humans. He looks at automation, and he sort of talks about the problems that we're going to have and what's going to come. And so it's kind of futurism, but it's really well researched.
Yeah.
And so he actually hit on a bunch of the things. So when I read Andrew Yang's book, it was like, oh man, this is great, because this is a guy who's like seeing some of the same kind of stuff, but he's actually presenting like solutions, or at least things we can do now to start getting ready for this very, very serious shift that's going to happen over the next, 20 to 60 years.
Cabinet, because I think he's got a lot of great ideas.
Yeah. And I would say, even if you're a staunch Republican and you don't like the idea of UBI, it's still a book worth reading, just because of the way he presents the problems that we or our children are going to be facing.
Yeah.
I think it's a book that I think it got a little press, but it was just because he was running for president. And I think even if he didn't run for president, it was a book deserving of attention. So I make sure you finish the book. Like
I will.
Like a lot of nonfiction, there's somewhere around 3/4 in where there's like a little bit of a lull. A lot of nonfiction books do that. You're like, all right, fine, I get the point. Well, it ends strong. It's a really good book.
Yeah, and that's something I've been thinking about for a long time. Not to drag this whole thing out too much longer, but like. When I was in college, I spent 2 summers working for like a nonprofit that did home repair for folks who otherwise couldn't afford it. And, a lot of them had just lost jobs due to, evolutions in technology or just changing industries, and like these people who had been, like when the factory leaves town, like that kind of thing. And like, so it's been on my mind since, like, not to say I'm ahead of Andrew Yang, 'cause I'm sure he's actually been thinking about it a lot longer than I have. And he's actually got the power and ideas to do something. But like, not to get too deep into politics, but like when I saw the 2016 election and like looked at a map of like who voted what, and I'm like, yeah, those are the areas where people are left behind by our the way our economy is developed. And I get it. I think they got played, but I get it.
And Donald Trump does a good job of blaming it on immigrants or bad government policy.
That was a big part of his rhetoric, but it's actually, I think, on people like him.
It's technology. I mean, some of it's offshoring, some of it's immigrants, but a lot of that is, and a lot more of it's going to be due to technological advances than anything else.
Yeah, like we're going to, like at McDonald's, you're not going to be giving your order to a person in 10 years.
No,
maybe even less than that, Like if you go to Sheetz, you're already plugging your. Oh God, I'm outing my fast food obsession. But if you go to Sheetz, you're already like tapping your order into a computer. Like you don't interact with a human until you're at the cash register usually.
Garrett, tell me more about how you order at Wendy's now.
It's always drive-through. I don't have the mental fortitude to walk inside a fast food place. Actually, I've not been to a McDonald's in years.
That's fine. I can't look them in the eye. All right. So what's the other book?
The other book is by a Christian-ish author named Donald Miller. It's a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, which he's got kind of an interesting story. He wrote a kind of like post-Christianity book in like 2003 called Blue Like Jazz, which kind of talks about like religion in the modern world, and it's a memoir, but it, kind of discusses a lot of different things. And so he actually got approached to make a movie out of that, which there was eventually a movie made. It's fine. As a movie, it's not terrible. It's not exceptional. But he had to like basically edit down the memoir of his like early 20s into being a 2-hour film narrative. And so it's just kind of like his somewhat free-flowing thoughts about like living your life like a story and how life maybe can't be lived as a story. So I kind of started reading it a little bit last year. And then as I do with a lot of books, I get like a quarter of the way in and then just kind of forget that I'm reading it, and then like I'll pick it back up in like a month and I'll be like, oh, I don't remember where I was. And so I just start another book entirely. It's a really bad habit, almost as bad as my fast food habit. And, but yeah, it's something I did read all the way through in college when I was kind of bumbling around and trying to find my way. And yeah, I found it really inspirational and kind of helped me to get on a path forward, and start thinking about like living your life with intentionality,
Yeah, that's good. Purpose is important.
Exactly.
What's the name? Donald Miller?
Donald Miller, yeah.
Donald Miller.
It's a solid book.
Nice.
But that is it for my recommendations. I've also written down 2 things you mentioned: the Race to Nowhere and Now Homo Deus. So
and both worth checking out. So I normally do the sort of the open mic here, but I realized we skipped one thing, and I don't know if you want to promote it or not, but I'm just curious. I'm assuming that so for people who don't know Garrett, who are listening to this, in addition to being an interesting guy with a great path through education and a lot of different diverse interests, right? You have an Instagram account that is dedicated to awesome baking of like making home pizzas and like artisan breads, right?
So yeah, there's Ursa Major Baking, which is the one I started like about 1.5 years ago as an evolution of my baking hobby, which kind of just began as a way to have like something to do with my hands when I was staring into a computer screen all weekend working on my second bachelor's degree.
Okay.
It was nice to have like a break every now and then to go up and, like fold a loaf of bread and put it in the oven and that kind of thing. So there's that. It's at Ursa Major Baking, URSAMAJOR Baking. And then I just moved to a house in Reston about a month and a half ago. And my roommate and I are really big into cooking. And so like it's a whole thing every single night. We spend like 2-3 hours just like working in the kitchen. And we share some of the crazy creations that we come up with food-wise. And that is Newbridge Eats. That's NEWBRIDGE, then EATS. I think that's what it is, actually.
I'll double check. I'll link it. I'll double check it and link it.
Yeah, you can link to my personal as well. I don't care.
And I bring it up, one, because some of it looks fantastic. Like I regularly, I make, it's
not as hard as it looks.
Well, no,
but ask me how difficult it is, and it's not.
No, I make good, but compared to yours, at least visually, crappy homemade pizzas. But the edge that I have is I grow all my own ingredients in my garden, so I can
love to do that.
I'm like, all the sauce is, aside from the salt, black pepper, that's it. Maybe tomato paste once in a while to thicken up. Like all of it is homegrown. So in the end, I look at the pictures of like the pizzas you make or the bread, and I'm like, oh, that looks so great. And so sometimes I just show my wife and I say, I throw little jabs like, if you really loved me, you'd make me something like that. And she usually just hits me. Or but no. So did that just come up? I mean, so you said you got more into that as sort of alongside doing online classes. It was something to do as you were watching videos and whatever.
Pretty much, yeah.
How much of that was an offshoot of the brewing? Like, was that related to the beer? I'm just thinking. It wasn't unrelated. Is this like a yeast thread?
So it did actually start a little bit before I started the second degree, but it definitely took off when I started the second degree and just needed something to take my eyes off the computer for even just a couple minutes. But yeah, it was definitely, because when I worked in brewing, I mostly worked on the fermentation side, which is, yeast. So I've always been kind of fascinated by the way yeast works, and I am very bad at biology. If you remember Mrs. Gunderson, you could ask her. I was not a good biology student. She liked me as a person, but as a student, yeah. So I don't think I'm equipped necessarily to understand like the complex microbiology behind yeast, because I've actually talked to a couple people who, that's actually one good way to get into the brewing industry and make money, is to get a PhD in microbiology and then do yeast. Because there's a guy who used to work at Lost Rhino, his name's Jasper, who now runs his own yeast company. And that's what he does. He's like got a PhD in microbiology. He used to work at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Ashburn, I think. Mm-hmm. This could all be inaccurate, so I hope he doesn't hear this. But yeah, he that's his thing now, is he just runs a yeast company and like supplies yeast to a lot of the local breweries.
That's awesome. And as the breweries grow, I mean, they need someone that, I just didn't know if that was connected. It is somewhat, yeah. Have you read or watched Cooked by Michael Pollan? So check that out on Netflix. Michael Pollan, in a sneaky way, is like this incredible writer, but he tends to focus on like food and plants. And I think at this point, I've read all of his books, like listen to audiobooks over the last maybe 2 years. And it's weird because I'm not like a super diet conscious guy. I sit here as a fat guy talking about this, but like, yeah, I mean, nor am I. I'm trying to be, but but like, In Defense of Food is one of the best, books, probably one of the best nonfiction books I've read. And he has all this stuff, but Cooked, the book was all right, but he made it into a Netflix like miniseries. Yeah. And it's like, I forget if it's
great food programming.
Yeah. It's like 4 parts or 6 parts, but it's him. And he's like going and interviewing these people, but he looks at the different ways to make food. And so one of them is fermentation, and the whole thing is about like yeast and the different ways people ferment food.
Yeah.
But he gets really into it, but he manages to still keep it interesting because he's talking to people, he's working in people's kitchens with them and stuff. So as someone who has the interest in baking and in brewing and in the food, like totally check out Cooked. That was actually the thing that in my head connected them, because I had already been seeing your creations on Instagram, and then I watched that, and when it got to like fermentation or whatever the section was, I was like, oh man, I bet that's because you worked at breweries. Like I bet that's the connection point. Like,
yeah, I mean it was when I started taking more of an interest in baking, like as I was kind of working in yeast. Yeah, so
awesome. All right, so The last thing, and you can do as much or as little as you want with it, but if there's anything that we either didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about, anything you want to promote, anything you want to say, or anything you want to ask me, you get the last words here. Is there anything you'd like to say, clarify, ask, or hit on that we missed?
No, not really. I don't really think I have anything to promote either. I mean, except for I'm looking for a job as of Wednesday, August 26, 2020 at 10:55 p.m. I'm looking for a job in the software IT field. It's the only thing I really have to promote. But apart from that, this was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you having me on.
It is good, and I appreciate you doing this. And I think there's a lot of stuff both in terms of school and career and the rest that I think people are talking about, but without being weird about it, like what you've just talked about in your own experience serves as like a case study of a lot of the other concerns or questions people have about students finding their path, or, you know, how much vocational versus traditional, and what we're doing with getting students degrees both in high school and college. Like you just sort of created a case study in a lot of the big hot button issues that people are talking about in the 10,000 foot view of what are we doing in education. So I appreciate you having this conversation and sharing so much personal experience, because I think that both is what makes this engaging, but also it makes it valuable, because as teachers, we have to remember that, you know, everyone involved, teachers, students, counselors, parents, are people, and that there is going to be like an outcome in the end. And so as someone who's recently graduated from your second degree, you know, you are one of those people. Like I taught you, and I'm glad we've kept in touch. And so hopefully people listening to this, particularly people in position to maybe make some of these decisions in schools, can sort of use your experience to guide some of that decision making, because like I said, we just talked about a lot of things I think schools and school leaders need to be considering. So thank you again for doing this.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. I'd love to come back if you ever want to discuss some of these same topics again and unpack things a little deeper.
We'll do this when the pandemic is over. We'll do one in person where we can drink beer and make pizza, and we'll just sort of talk for a while through it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Good deal. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.